am uniquely qualified to tell you this because I started my career in journalism before you used the internet to do reporting, which is something that I tell my colleagues now, and they're like, wow, how old are you? And I worked for traditional news organizations for almost 20 years. Before joining Quartz about 2 years ago. This is an online startup, digital only, no paper involved. And I have so thoroughly drunk the social media Kool-Aid that I really believe that it is sort of the future of making journalism work, and that everyone in this room and everyone in the industry needs to understand how it works. So the first thing I want to do is tell you just a little bit about Quartz. And it was started, as I said, about 2 years ago. It was started by journalists from the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Wired, and many other places. We are owned by Atlantic Media. It's a real old school news organization. It publishes the Atlantic Monthly magazine, which has been coming out since the 1850s in the US. But Quartz is a business-focused, online-only news organization. Right now we've got 50 journalists. We have about 10 million unique viewers every month. Our target reader is a digital native. It's someone who gets their news from the internet, doesn't pick up paper. They go online all the time to figure out what's going on. And they're looking for a fresh, interesting perspective on things that are already happening in the news, or they're looking for news itself. They're looking for new things having to do with stuff that they care about. And if you don't know us, this is what we look like. We've got a really seamless design. It works really nicely on your phone and everything else. There's no paywall. There's no pop-ups. It's lovely. It just sort of moves very quickly. And some of the reason that I think everybody here needs to know about social media is, and this is a Quartz headline. It's our traditional quirky headline and picture combo about a study that just came out last week. This came out from Zenith Optimedia, showing that people around the world are spending 8 hours a day consuming media, and that includes television, that includes radio, that includes newspapers, everything else. Television still has this sort of lion's share of people's attention at about 3 hours a day, but the internet is second and growing fast at about 2 hours a day. And I'm going to show you what that change looks like. In media consumption from 2010 to 2015. Now this is media, this is everything from cat videos to, I don't know, music videos to sort of checking Facebook. So your internet consumption, most people's internet consumption has doubled in the past 5 years, while their consumption of everything else is going down. But what does this look like when we're talking about, specifically about news? Handily enough, just last week there was another survey that looked, this is US only, at where people are getting their news from. And if you look through the whole, overall in the entire survey, 60% still list television as their largest source of news. And maybe 10% list online websites, online news websites and things. But the lower you go down in age bracket, the more people are relying on social media to tell them what's going on in the world. And this right here is the lowest age bracket, the 14 to 25-year-old millennial. Right now, social media platforms as a source of news are almost as important for them as television, and more important than everything else. And there's no reason to think this is going to go backwards or that this is a blip. This is sort of the direction that we're all going, which is why we need to sort of understand what's happening here. And the way that because people are relying on social media for their news, that means that they're no longer visiting your homepage. If you are a news organization, less and less people are coming directly to your homepage to sort of read everything that you've got, do a cover-to-cover morning read. It just doesn't happen that much anymore. I found that my own personal news consumption has shifted a lot, where I used to go every morning religiously to Reuters, the New York Times, and Bloomberg. And I still do for my job, but if I'm off or something, I won't do that. I'll get stuff during the day. It'll come to me if it's important. And a lot of other people are thinking the same way. And so this is sort of what Quartz is built on here, is this idea that social media is what's fueling us. We don't have a traditional homepage. We get all of our traffic from social media, from our events, from a daily email we do. This is us after 2 years, 10 million monthly unique visitors. Our social media reach is 250 million. This is just sort of people that we think are seeing Quartz stories and Quartz-related things. We have readers on Flipboard and Google Newsstand, and then we have a daily brief, which is an email that goes out to 110,000 people. And we do about 20 events a year. And what I've put together here is sort of some of the lessons I've learned in the past few years. And I find myself saying this all the time, which is, what does the internet want today? What is going on? What are people wanting to read today? And this is, what kind of news does the internet want? You know, the operative word here is news. There is a massive hunger right now for fast, accurate news that tells you something that you need to know, tells you something new about something you care about, tells you breaking news, tells you something more about something that's happening that helps you understand it better. You know, we, and I'm sure everybody else that's at a news organization in this room, saw their traffic go up when you do news-related things, whether it's the Hong Kong protests, or the Malaysia Airlines flight that disappeared, where everyone around the world was going, what happened? Like, what? Or it's an Apple product launch. We see our traffic spike with all of that, thanks to social media. There's a hunger for information right now, and it doesn't have to be necessarily breaking news. It can be, like I said, related to something that people care about, but that gives them a new perspective or a new information about that. And this is my, oh, and yes, the remainder of this will be in listicle format because we're doing a social media presentation. This is the last Quartz slide, really. The Quartz curve is something that Quartz's founders developed when they studied what it is that people are reading news-wise on social media. And our x-axis here is sort of the length of a story, and the y-axis is the likelihood of success. We judge success by whether or not people are reading it. That's success. So either something short and fast and on the news, or you can write a longer, more thoughtful, well-researched, investigative article that could relate to what's happening in the news, or like I said, it might not have to relate to what's happening in the news. It could be new information for people that they care about. And this gap in the bottom, this is where people don't really read things on the internet. That's the sort of 500 to 800 word article, which is what most news organizations, traditional news organizations, are still doing right now. On social media, if you want your stories to be successful, your headline has got to be your selling point. We spend a lot of time workshopping headlines. It needs to be something that people want to share as a tweet or on Facebook. It has to be specific, immediate, and to the point. This is one of the early Quartz headlines that did really well. It related to an embargo study that everybody had a copy of. And we just had a better headline, and hundreds of thousands of people read, "Scientists discover what's killing the bees, and it's worse than you thought." It just was sort of it was a serious story. It was an embargo thing about pollution and bees dying off. But presented in this sort of way that made everyone go, huh, what is it? I picked two recent headlines from competitors that are confusing and opaque, that nobody's going to share on social media. Contact lens makers and discounters tussle over price setting. And illusion of motion in stocks bonds, repeating arc in 2014. If you're a journalist in this room, you should be involved somehow in your headlines. Are you leaving that up to your editors? Are you doing it yourself? If you don't have a good way to immediately sort of pinpoint the most important thing about your story and tell people how you'd like to sell it, then maybe it's not a great story. You should be involved in that very actively. A caveat to this, a great headline doesn't mean that people are going to share your story, obviously. You need to back your headlines up with good reporting, and putting out good headlines and mediocre copy behind it and poorly researched things is only going to lose your readers in the long run. You can have the best headline and the best presentation in the world, and people are just eventually going to distrust you as a news source. So that for me is it comes with that saying. I feel like as everyone got social media crazy in the past 2 years, we all got sort of nuts with these novelty headlines, like the curiosity gap. You'll never believe this. You can't believe what this is going to look like. I am so over these. And I think the internet is over these. Like, people are done with these. There is a shrinking and limited window for this kind of novelty headline out there. And if you're using this kind of way to grab people's attention, it's starting to seem very outdated. And this is a sort of related to one. This is you know, this is my personal a pet peeve for me. Headlines that tell you what to feel. I feel like they're starting to insult my intelligence. This is a obituary for a 24-year-old heroin user. Of course it's heartbreaking. Of course it's powerful. And I just feel like there's so many, because everyone's figuring social media out, there's so many different news organizations that are trying to grab your attention that readers are starting to get sort of sick of it and immune to it, I think. So and this is, like I said, this is personal for me. I think this sort of headline is just on the way out. Other things on the way out, stories about what people are saying about X on social media. Like, nobody cares. It's important when it's a news event. It's a great source of reporting if there's something like the Hong Kong protests going on, or there's a you know earthquake or something where you know the Nepal earthquake was wonderful. That there are a lot of people on social media being like, this is what it looks like. I'm standing right here. Here it is. That's something that different. This is Dory is the cultural editor for BuzzFeed, and she's obviously joking here about this sort of very lazy impulse that some newspapers and news organizations have had to turn to social media rather than and say, okay, here's a very simple, easy thing. This is what people are saying on social media about X. Like, it's just it's another one of those things that the novelty has worn off, and it's sort of time to say goodbye to. As an old school reporter, and particularly as an M&A reporter for years, this is painful but true. Your deal scoop is only an exclusive for about 12 minutes. This was a great story the Journal put out last week about a potential $60 billion deal. Within minutes, it had been sort of rewritten by Verge and Business Insider, who of course linked to the Journal, and they credit the Journal. And it had also been written by Reuters and USA Today. There's just a tiny window of opportunity when you have an exclusive anymore because of the prevalence of social media. And that's partially because most readers on social media don't care who's giving them this information. They're just as happy to read the Reuters story about the Wall Street Journal story as they are to read the Wall Street Journal story. You know, if you're the Journal or Reuters or anyone else and you're running a newswire and people are paying you, traders are paying you to trade on information like this, of course these are important. And if you're a journalist on the beat, of course these are important to establish your credibility, but you need to understand that they're only going to be exclusive for a short period of time. And I've heard some traditional media editors and reporters complain a little bit about, they feel like their traffic is being stolen because they'll put out an exclusive story and someone else will put a better headline on it, and they'll link to it, and they'll refer to it, and they will get more traffic from it. And I feel like in this day and age, if someone else is doing that, nobody feels sorry for you anymore. Like, you're a grown-up media organization. If you don't have somebody 24/7 that's doing great social media, and you don't have someone 24/7 that's writing great headlines that are going to get your stories the traffic they deserve, then you need to change what you're doing. At this point, not having a round-the-clock social media strategy is sort of like having a website that only works a few hours a day. I mean, you need to think about that. On the positive side, this was a sort of a funny, lovely story, excuse me. This was a lovely story by Jim Yardley that went sort of viral on Facebook a few weeks ago. And it's not new, in that there's nothing new about this. He went to southern Italy, and he met a man who started doing a little plumbing on his house, and he kept digging and digging and digging, and he wound up digging through layers of history over many years, and eventually uncovered things that dated back to before the birth of Christ. And so he turned his home into this museum. You know, it was this sort of plumbing project that became a museum. The museum's been open for years. It's not new, it's not news, but it was so widely circulated and tweeted and shared, and I saw it everywhere on social media, just because it was a lovely story. It was this strange and beguiling tale of a guy that just wanted to do some of his own plumbing, and there you go. Last I looked, it had been liked by 16,000 people on Facebook, which means that the actual number of readers must be many times that. So things like this social media loves things like this. It likes you to tell a good tale, just like regular journalism, and to do something in a graceful and beautiful way. And this is this was one of our most successful Quartz stories. It's about that blue and pink baby blanket that you see there, which you will see on almost every baby that you see on Facebook. And it's the story itself sort of started, I think, with someone in our newsroom being like, did you ever wonder why? And so someone went off and reported the whole thing, and it turns out that there's one company in Illinois that makes these blankets. They're now manufactured in Pakistan. They've been made for generations. If your parents were born in a hospital, there's probably a picture of them in the same blanket. And it's like a weird, it would be a wonderful Wall Street Journal A-head or an AP big story or something. It's a strange business profile that I don't know what our reader traffic on this was, but it was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people passed along just because it was like, I know that blanket. I've seen that blanket. What a strange, interesting thing. So people are interested in these sort of in-depth, tales that tell them something they didn't know. And all of this said, I think it is important if you're working for a company or you are an independent journalist to sort of keep your traditional identity, your own personal identity in mind. This is a tweet by The Economist that I looked at and I was like, oh my God, is there anything less social media friendly than a photo of a pair of reading glasses on top of a folded copy of the paper Economist, being like there's an essay in here? It's like, it got retweeted 108 times. That means at least some of those people read it. The Economist is actually doing great on social media. They have 8.5 million Twitter followers, more than a lot of the big US newspapers. And they're doing great by just sort of being themselves. Like, this is unapologetically not trying to be anything but The Economist. Like, wear a pair of glasses. There you go. And just, in conclusion, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and all of those sort of differences aside, I really think that people want on social media and on the internet sort of the same news that they've always wanted. But they just want more of it, and they want it faster, and they want it told to them in a way that they can understand it immediately. So that's me. Can I take any questions? Yes.
What is your definition of clickbait, and is it a good or bad thing?
Funny. Every headline is clickbait. Like, if your definition of clickbait is, let's just get people to click on this article, then everything is clickbait. I tend to see it much more negatively, as you get people to click on your article, and then what you promise you don't deliver. That's my own personal definition, and like I said, that's really devastating for a news organization. You don't want people clicking on things that aren't as good as your headline is, otherwise they will just stop trusting you.
Can you just tell me where you see, if relevant, the newsletter that you send out, what role that plays in social media, either as a primary source of news or something that sort of generates, further shares as opposed to all the other stuff within the social platforms?
Yeah, the Daily Brief newsletter is something that we started right away when Quartz started, and strangely enough, it was original, and then people had so given up on newsletters that everyone was like, a newsletter by email, imagine. I think it's good for branding. It's good for people to get something every day in their mailbox, from us. Often it does have links to different stories from Quartz. It's good for advertising. People advertise against it as well. And it's a good sort of, in a way, it's not physical, it's not email, but it's sort of a good it's a good product that you can sit, with by yourself. So our US is our biggest newsletter market right now, but we do one for Europe and Africa, and we do one for Asia as well. So we've got 2 different time zones of that.
So how much traffic does that generate, directly or indirectly?
Well, there's 110,000 newsletter subscribers. I don't know how many people go from the newsletter to Quartz, though. I just could not tell you. But like I said, it's almost like an independent product. We sell ads off it all by itself, so it's like it's a Quartz product, rather than necessarily a traffic driver.
Just on the home page thing, how do you know that with a home page you would be getting more traffic?
We started it's almost like a modified homepage, just to give people something to land on, which has got the sort of top 10 items from our daily brief. I don't know what that's done to traffic. It was an experiment, like so many things at Quartz, we just sort of tried it to find out. If you get in touch with me later, I can probably tell you. I can probably find out and let you know.
How do you prioritize it, order what stories to pursue? Because I know from reading Quartz, you cover a wide range, still growing as an organization, staffing challenges, I'm sure. How do you prioritize it? I mean, you know what people want to read, but you also have limited time and stories of different length and intensity.
Sure. That's a good question. It varies from day to day, of course. Sometimes there's a big event or a big business news thing that you sort of have to say something about. You have to cover. We have people that specifically cover Apple. Tech is really big for us, so we've got people that's their thing. We've got someone in Silicon Valley. Out here in Asia, when the Hong Kong protests happened, we had 2 reporters, myself and somebody else, that were covering them almost constantly, and it became this self-fulfilling thing. The sort of more coverage we did, the more Hong Kong readers we could see we were getting. And we were like, okay, there's an audience for this, and I think we're adding value to the coverage out there. So we're just going to go ahead and do it. It's very personal. It is. We have a special Quartz thing called Obsessions, where you're, as a reporter, you're encouraged to go write about what you care about, because the theory is that you do better reporting on what you actually really care about, and even better if you're sort of wonkily, nerdily obsessed with something. So a lot of people sort of take themselves out in that way. We have someone that covers the sea sort of obsessively, and climate change, and but it's very individual. It really is. We have rolling conversations. You'll get on to our Slack chat and talk to whoever's on and be like, I'm thinking about doing this, and there'll always be someone there. They'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Have you thought about this? Or, I can't decide between this and this. We do a lot of collaboration. We do a lot of conversations.
And then the microphone.
Yeah.
You mentioned that media accompanies traditional identity is important on social media. But I wonder what exactly does you mean by identity, and how important is what's the traditional identity in your sense?
Well, I guess I said that partially because it was interesting to see how well The Economist has done by not trying to be like quirky and cute and social media. They just decided this is where we are. Like it, leave it. And I think other news organizations have struggled with this, where some people have said, should we try to be more BuzzFeedy? Should we try to be more this and try to be more that? And I think that when they go back to their sort of what their traditional goals and values are, and then present that in a good way on social media, they do better. Does that make sense?
Very quickly, what's the percentage of people are really in the field running, reporting, or what's the percentage of people inside the editorial room and doing those headlines you're talking about?
Well, most of our reporters come up with their headlines, generally. They also pick their own pictures and stuff like that. If we have 50 editorial staff, maybe 10 of them are editors and 40 are reporters, probably. And then, we do have separate social media people right now, but yeah, we have sort of a growth team that's responsible for sort of getting things out there on social media as well. So that's 3 people right now.
How did you come up with that readable design, which to me piece of that?
You know what, I wish I, not
Was
me.
it a collaboration on the block party?
It was one of the original founders, Zach Stewart, who came from Wired originally, and he's obsessed with design and like crazy and wonky and nerdy about it, and that's what, you know.
It paid off, it really.
Yeah, he really, you know, and has spent a lot of time thinking about what works and doesn't work, and the sort of interaction he wants to have with his device and things, yeah. Sure.
Please give a hand to